With this segment, I'm doing something a bit funky, which is that over the weekend segments, this will be covered in a bit more detail because we're going to be looking at part 3 of a 4-part series of investigative journalist articles done by Town Hall examining the case of the 2 Georgia gay adoptive parents who turned out to have been sadly molesting the 2 boys that they had adopted. Callum is covering that over the weekend for part 1 and 2, which is going to be examining some of the details of how it happened, what the details of the case were. What I wanted to look at here was part 3, which came out yesterday. For those listening, part 4 is already out by the time that we're recording this live. I just haven't had the chance to be able to look through it, and it doesn't seem as pertinent for a lot of the information that I want to look at anyway. So this is going to be looking at how these 2 men were able to adopt 2 children in the first place, when it turns out that back in 2011, one of them, I believe Zachary Zulak is what his name is, was potentially investigated very briefly for potentially molesting a 14-year-old boy, and how despite that in 2018 he and his husband were able to adopt the child. So we'll be looking at that. Before I go any further, I think this is quite a relevant one. This is another article from Connor's current attempt to purge the degenerates, I think is a good way of putting it, where he's examining the question of consent and pointing out that consent in and of itself is not a moral standard. This is following on from some of the stuff that we've discussed about Louise Perry's book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, and the interview that he also did, which is available on the website that you should definitely check out, with Louise Perry, where they examine the subject as well. Basically just looking at the fact that consent is being positioned currently as the moral be-all and end-all for all acts that one can take in the privacy of their own home, and obviously consent is a very important thing. You don't want to be forcing people, especially in a sexual circumstance, to do things that they don't want to. That's heinous and immoral and just evil of somebody to do. But at the same time, positioning the idea of consent alone as being the only thing that matters when there are other things to take into account is a slippery slope that we are rapidly falling down. So check that article out. I'm sure Connor will go into a lot more detail than I have here. Anyway, let's get into the actual story. So as I mentioned, Town Hall have been doing a quite spectacular 4-part investigative piece on this. It's been led by Mia Cathell, I think that I'm pronouncing that name right, and she has been doing a great job. It seems that they followed up on a lot of the information, because this was just another story that could have flown under the radar. Well, become a big thing when it happened. I think it was back in August, end of July, August last year.
I think it was end of August.
Yeah, end of August last year in that case. And it could have been one of those things that blew up and then everybody just ignores it and moves on to the next thing to be outraged about. But Mia and Town Hall have done a very good job following this up, gathering the details and finding out more about it. Now, as I said, Callum will be covering some of this over the weekend, so I won't go too much into details, but for an important rundown of the things that you do need to know from part 1 and 2 to understand the rest of this article. So these were 2 Georgia-based gay men, a Zachary and Michael and William Zulak, who were married to one another. One of them was a banking teller, and the other one did a job that I can't remember off the top of my head.
I think he was a government.
Yes, he was a government clerk or something. I think so.
But not a big position.
No, neither of these people had well-paying jobs or anything. I think between them, their combined income came to less than $70,000, which makes some of the developments in this a little, well, very, very suspicious and worth looking into, which I know the police are doing currently. So they adopted 2 children in 2018, and then last summer, in August, they got caught molesting both of them and offering them to other local gay men in the area to molest and share pictures and videos of. Sadly, they got caught because 2 of these other paedophiles that they were trying to involve in it also got caught separately, and these 2 men sold these guys down the river to try and get a more lax deal on whatever sentence that they're going to get, because I think one of them was caught downloading child sexual exploitation material, which is all awful. Everybody except the children involved in this story is a complete scumbag, and it does make me feel just very sick to talk about these sorts of things, sadly. And despite not really being able to afford it on their combined income, which, as I said, was about less than $70,000 between them, the 2 of them were somehow able to have a mansion built in Georgia over an incredibly quick period of time in 2020, raising questions. where did that money come from?
Yes.
Where on earth did that money come from? Especially when you consider the plans to build the house must have included this, because it turned out that they had a secret room with no windows in the home, hidden behind a bookcase. This is actual supervillain stuff that was going on. And the people designing the house, the people looking at the planning for the house, the people looking at the finances, wondering how they... This just flew under everybody's radar, apparently. Very interesting. Very interesting that the IRS can seemingly track anybody down for tax fraud and other such things, except when there's just building a mansion. Just building a mansion casually, just took out some loans. That must have been what it was. The second part of the articles as well detailed their travels across the states in the US to a number of gay-friendly communities across the country and just other remote parts of the country, and examined the fact that, as I mentioned, they shouldn't have been able to afford this house. So how is it they were affording it, which has led to many questions, especially seeing as in the local area they were trying to get involved some other local paedophiles, that there was a countrywide paedophile ring going on that they were at the centre of, involving the two adopted children, which is very, very horrible. Were you about to say something?
No, it's just, it's beyond words.
It truly is. It's horrifying to read about such a things, and it is shocking that this has happened, but it is important to shine a spotlight on it. And once again, well done to Town Hall and Mia Cattle in particular for following up on this and not letting it just get forgotten like so many other stories do. So many of these stories tend to just get left behind in the outrage cycle. They get left behind and people just go on to the next one, or maybe just file it away as an example to bring up. And just an example to throw at a leftist if they're in an argument with them. But it is really important to examine what went on, how it happened, and why it is that so much of the infrastructure for the local area, including this adoption agency and such, were able to let these people adopt, despite the fact that one of them had previously been looked into for potentially raping a child. It's awful.
How did they get to adopt these children? I mean, if one of them was someone who was accused of molesting a child.
We'll go through that because Mia and Town Hall have done everything they can to try and speak to the local authorities and get that information. Sadly, it seems they've not got a particularly satisfactory answer, or at least certainly not as far as I'm concerned, because there doesn't really seem to be an answer. But I'll go through the information.
I don't think will get one.
No. The most I can say is that everything involved in this, from the state and local level authorities to the place that they got the agency that they adopted the children from, is pretty much gone now. I think it's shut down, it's defunct. So there's at least that. But if the authorities were involved in this adoption, I think there needs to be some reform and people looking into this. So 7 years prior to the adoption, so that was in 2018 and this is 2011, Zachary was accused of being a child rapist but was never charged. There was a 2011 probe into Zachary's alleged paedophilic behaviour when he was accused of luring a 14-year-old boy to a residence in Walton County, the same jurisdiction as today's horrifying child sexual abuse case, and having doing vile acts with the underage victim. I don't really want to say exactly what it says here because it's awful, but the 2011 case was shut down and no charges were pursued against Zachary, and we'll see that they have reopened that case, as is reasonable to do. Alcovey Judicial Circuit District Attorney Randy McKinley, who serves Walton County, has now formally asked Walton County Sheriff's Office to continue its previous probe because he believes it was closed without a whole lot of investigation into it. And I would not be surprised if that is the case, because it's turned out that he's done the same thing later on with children that he adopted, so the likelihood is they prematurely closed that case, and people need to be punished for not looking into it anywhere near as thoroughly as they should have. The 2011 case is now being looked into by my office along with the Sheriff's Office, so we've got the District Attorney's Office looking into it personally as well. So, background information for the couple. Zachary started dating William in the summer of 2013, and the men married about 4 years later in December 2017. Since they've been together, William said he looked forward to the day, and they got a lot of this information off of social media. They've also spoken to family members that were aware of some of the situation, or at least aware of the surface level of the situation of, oh, they're just a happy family with kids now. That's what it was. That's as far as they saw. But they also, one of the family members was supposedly given access to Zachary's social media accounts. I think this might have either been before or after they were arrested, and has been able to find some information through that has been given to Town Hall. So, yeah, since they've been together, he said he looked forward to the day that he can start a family. The gay newlyweds then sought to locally adopt children not long after their picturesque wedding. In 2018, the Zuluck co-defendants adopted the two brothers through All God's Children Incorporated, a now defunct private special needs adoption agency in Watkinsville. The brothers, now aged 9-11, and you can understand that they have completely erased the faces. They've censored the faces from all the photographs included in here of the two children, and they have not included the names for privacy reasons. I can only hope that these kids get to go and be adopted by somebody who will look after them and get the appropriate help that they need, because I can't imagine that this is going to be...
No, that's horrible, and this is the kind of trauma that we see in documentaries as being responsible for messing people up. I hope this doesn't...
Understandably so.
I hope this is not the case with them.
Yeah, it doesn't help as well that supposedly these two children came, who are brothers, as I mentioned, are from a broken home where their biological parents were addicted to heroin. And this is according to a relative's knowledge. And this relative, one of the family members associated with this case, said, I do think they had every intention, and that's why they adopted them for this purpose. And when they say intention of abusing these children. They also say that William and Zachary likely preyed on the children's vulnerability as kids raised by struggling heroin addicts. And that's according to the family member as well. And it's just awful. It's awful to know that these kids not only went through that with their actual parents, first of all, being heroin addicts, but then that they were... by the state, and this does remind me a lot of the German Helmut Kendler case that was covered a few years ago on the podcast as well, which was talking about how the German state, in an attempt to prevent children from growing up to be Nazis, put foster children in the care of actual known paedophiles, purely because they thought that the sexual liberation of such an act, making sure that these children weren't sexually repressed from a young age, which is what they assumed, was why the Nazis became the Nazis. That's a hell of a radical take you've got there, but they assume the sexual repression is what caused Nazism. Therefore, if we put them with paedophiles who will sexually abuse them from a young age, they won't be sexually repressed. Voila, they won't turn out to be Nazis.
I mean, that's dodgy as hell.
Genius, absolute genius. And that was sponsored by the German government up until 2004, as a reminder.
This is tragic because governments, they cannot replace family.
No, of course
and
not.
I think that the breakdown of the family is, opens the doors of hell. If I should.
And it's all a point of centralization to ensure that the power remains in as few specific hands, really, isn't it? Because families can form opposite power centers to a government. Family is a very powerful thing, especially the more close knit a family is. If you're my goals when I'm older is to sort of position myself at the head of the Robinson family dynasty. That's what I want.
You want Clan Robinson.
I want Clan Robinson to rule the world. But the state has done a very, very good job at positioning itself in such a way and engineering the circumstances that we find it in to be really difficult to raise a family.
Yeah.
I would love nothing better for my missus to be able to just not work a job, stay at home all day and raise our kids when we have kids. That's incredibly difficult in the economic situation that we are right now.
It's almost impossible, and it is one of the main reasons why we have a problem with birth rates.
Yes.
It's not the only one, but one of the main ones.
Oh, absolutely. But yes, the state was involved in this because, as we'll find out later, but as well as undergoing criminal background checks, William and Zachary were required to attend mandatory pre-adoption parenting classes called Parents as Tender Healers, trauma-informed training curriculum to learn more about parenting children with a history of losses. An agency caseworker also completed a family assessment, which was presented to social workers throughout Georgia for matchmaking and a study of the home study of the Zulucks. The entire undertaking took 8 to 12 weeks. So that's all it took.
That's ridiculous.
Just a few classes. 3 months tops. Just look around the house. Everything seems fine to me. Are we going to do any background and criminal checks on them? Yes, apparently.
It seems to me that this is something that that comes to the mind of many people in these cases, where they say, no, we have to show that we give children to people, to foster parents, so we show how productive we are.
Yeah, they've not actually done any safeguarding here, by the sounds of it. I'm sure there would have been signs, and if these guys did just turn out to be really good at hiding their proclivities, that's fine. But at the same time, Zachary literally had a case open and shut, yes, but a case was still put against him about potential sexual abuse of children in the past. Why was that not questioned further? Why did that not raise any eyebrows in the adoption process? I would think that anybody having that sort of case put against them would probably at the least be a red flag. Obviously, there will be false allegations of such a thing, so it shouldn't necessarily bar people outright just from the off, but it should at least raise some concerns.
It should, and we shouldn't play with children.
No, it's a very dangerous situation to put kids in. The Georgia courts made the Forever family official on November 7th, 2018. All God's Children, getting a bit more information from them, a former member agency of the Georgia Association of Licensed Adoption Agencies statewide network, had worked in partnership with the Georgia Department of Health Service, which oversees the state's Division of Family and Children's Services, to find families for Georgia's waiting children, according to the agency's description. Town Hall did contact the Georgia DHS regarding how much oversight and involvement it had in the agency's operations, and their communications director, Kylie Winton, stated that the DHS's Office of Residential Childcare, a unit tasked with inspecting, monitoring, and registering childcare facilities, licenses adoption agencies for the placement of children in adoptive homes, and that such licensed private agencies focus primarily on the adoption of children who are not in the custody of DFCS. This does not seem to be answering the question of how involved were you in this. Obviously, it means that they were massively involved in these organizations, but I think the implicit question as well is how involved were you? Were you aware of all of this as it went down? Did you have any scrutiny placed on these people? No response. No real answer to that question.
This is a classic bureaucratic response, and I hate to be negative, but in this case, will be. It seems to me that we won't get any answers. It's very easy for people to say, well, we didn't know, we didn't have any signs, they were really good at tricking us. So it's...
Well, when you do all that, some people, and I don't think completely in an unfounded manner, are raising and have been raising questions for a long time, ever since it was made legal in the United States and other countries, raising the questions of whether it's even appropriate to allow gay couples to adopt in the first place, especially given what most people are aware of as constituting the gay lifestyle and all of the scandals that have come out over the decades around that, especially given the fact that these two were LGBTQ whatever activists as well. You can see in the pictures that you've got there, Love My Family, they've all got the rainbow pride flag on. Their entire home in the photographs that Town Hall were able to get of it was completely head to foot in LGBT propaganda. They had lots of signs everywhere saying love is love, where have I heard that phrase before, and other such slogans. So these people are activists for the LGBT cause, as Callum would put it. So it does raise questions. Okay, if these are the sorts of people that this movement attracts, should we be worried about the safeguarding of children around them, especially with everything else that's going on with Drag Queen Story Hour and the like?
I must add something to this, because I was some months ago, I was watching some Netflix documentaries about Ted Bundy and Gacy. And they were involved in communities because that was a way to attract people. And they seem to me to be pretty psychopathic. I mean, you did well when you did not read what they did, but it's horrible. But it seems to me that this is something that only very monstrous people would do.
Absolutely.
And it says a lot that they thought that the LGBTQ community is nowadays the community in which you get and have easy access to people.
Mm-hmm. Especially given that it's all focused around protecting youth.
Yes.
Nowadays, you've got cases like LGBT Youth Scotland, where the actual organizer, I forget what his name, something Rennie, of that organisation, was using it as basically a front to be able to get access to vulnerable young children and then take them to inappropriate environments. And when I say children, between 12 and 16, it seemed to be the age that he was attracting there. And he would then take them to gay clubs across the country, get them into places where they were far too young to be, and introduce them to men who were very interested in very inappropriate behavior with them. And that's just something that seems to be part and parcel with these organizations at this point, sadly. I wish it were the case otherwise, but that's just what seems to be the reality of the matter. But anyway, so Town Hall asked if the 2011 case was ever officially brought up over the course of the adoption process, and if the alleged incident ever appeared during Zachary's criminal records check when the co-defendant applied to become an adoptive parent. Guess what the DHS said? Guess what they said? DFCS Child Welfare and the CPS records are confidential under state law. Well, screw you. Absolutely go and screw yourself for trying to absolve yourself of any responsibility by just going, oh, it's confidential. No, people deserve an answer. People deserve to know how complicit in this you were. If you saw it and just decided to dismiss it and say, oh, nothing, no problem, just put it through anyway. Or if you just ignored it, or if you missed it, in which case you're just terrible at your job. I didn't mean to get a bit angry there, sorry. As such, we are unable to comment on the specifics of any child welfare or abuse neglect cases, nor confirm or deny the existence of related records. Absolute POS. I wish I could be harsher, but we want to be a family-friendly show. As for how involved Georgia DFCS was in the agency's background checks, family placement and home visits, Winton said, all families are required to undergo background checks, including fingerprint-based checks of state and national crime information databases and checks of child abuse and neglect registries.
So,
how did you miss it?
How did you miss the accusation?
It's absolutely ridiculous. And
it's the one thing not to miss.
Yeah, and a Zolock family insider even said to Town Hall, everything seemed fine. I actually thought DFCS would be more scrutinising with them because they were a same-sex couple. It just seemed like they passed everything with flying colours. And I do wonder, given the age that we live in, if it was a worry about being called out for being homophobic, not being considered inclusive enough, if it was the political pressures that we see all the time these days being put on this organisation that they just decided, let's not bother, we don't want to have a massive mob of woke activists outside our front doors, let's just push it through anyway. In which case, this is just an absolute neglect of duty of care in the most awful way possible. But let me just remind myself of the name of the organisation. All God's Children, the original place that they adopted from, dissolved in October 2022. Zachary's social media accounts showed that he had privately discussed on Instagram its impending dissolution with All God's Children's ex-executive director, Emily Carroll Bailey, when he was going to refer someone to y'all on the website. So in likelihood, let's be perfectly honest here, he was probably going to direct another nonce of where to get easy pickings. That's how I interpret that. Zachary disclosed that he and William were deciding on adopting a girl too. We're still trying to decide if we want to adopt a girl. We're doing awesome. The boys have changed so much from when we first met them. They aren't even the same kids. And no, they never will be ever again because of you. Just awful. Just absolutely awful. Thank God that they didn't get the chance to expand. What I consider here, these people were probably, in all likelihood, we know that they, in the local area, but they were probably running a paedophile ring across the country. So I'm so glad that they didn't get the opportunity to expand the range of their services. Because we know that they were looking for vulnerable kids. They were specifically going through a place that operated on the basis of we will rehome vulnerable children from bad backgrounds. They were looking for vulnerable kids that they could take advantage of, who they know that they can manipulate and make them force them into keeping their mouths shut.
And they lived in a very expensive mansion.
Yeah, when they had no means otherwise of affording it. Once again,
that should raise suspicion by itself.
They didn't just buy it either. They had it built in record time across the summer of 2020, and it had a specific windowless secret room hidden behind a bookcase.
And they were ratted out by the other two people.
Mm-hmm.
So, there are at least four grown-ups involved
and
in this.
I doubt that it would have just been 2 extra incomes from what they were trying to get from those guys that would have been able to allow them to afford such a massive home. It's absolutely disgusting and absolutely ridiculous. And what is the left-wing response to this case? Is it outrage that this happened? Is it concern for the well-being of the children? No, it's not. It's how dare you notice. How dare you notice that bad things happen when we get our way? Media Matters. In the year 2023, I can hear this in John Oliver's voice in my head. Prominent right-wing commentators still have a problem with same-sex parents. I wonder why. I wonder why old-fashioned gay bashing hasn't died out on the right, with influential figures continuing to target same-sex couples who want to participate in institutions typically praised by American conservatives like marriage and parenthood. Now, most people, in reality, are just reporting on the facts. I have seen people asking questions like that, but I don't think it's unreasonable for them to do so. I'm not saying that similar things don't happen with straight parents. Even in the UK, we have some awful cases like, I'm going to say these names, don't look them up online because you will be subject to one of the worst and most horrifying stories you've ever heard, but Fred and Rose West, for instance, there are examples of awful parents who are otherwise straight and normal, etc. But I don't think it's out of the ordinary to say that this is more likely a more likely occurrence with gay people, especially gay people who are on the woke activist side of things, given gay hookup and cruising culture, which I've sadly learned about over the past year, well-documented connections from the 1970s and 80s with paedophile groups like Pi in the UK, situations like I brought up earlier, like the LGBT Youth Scotland turning out to be basically a honeypot for another paedophile ring that was going on there, led by the leader of the organisation, and other well-documented cases of gay teens being pressured and taken advantage of by older men. This is all just facts that you can find out there that the media don't want you to know.
Is there any research for this? I was looking at a research yesterday that said that one out of, I think it was 240,000. I'll have to. I don't want to say. I don't want to give false data. So I will.
The most that I can say off the top of my head is that Josh has done looked into some research and found that a lot of the time people, who say have alternative lifestyles, shall we say, often tend to score much higher on dark triad scores, psychologically speaking. And also, I did see some research that people were pointing out recently that came to the conclusion that gay people are not more likely to be paedophiles, but then also the research itself just completely dismissed the idea that if you are a man raping a young boy, that you are gay. So it was automatically discounting them as being gay people in the first place, even though
that's weird.
It's a same-sex assault. It's awful, but it's telling. It's telling of how they conduct this research to be able to provide the conclusions that they already want to get to. They find the conclusion first and then manipulate the data to try and get to that conclusion in a more legitimate fashion, shall we say. And the article goes on, but I mean, do we really need to go any further into this? This is an awful story, an awful circumstances, and we've got the clown world response as usual. So I'm sorry for having to bring this to your attention, but it is important, and well done to Mia Cathell and Town Hall for actually putting in the legwork and doing some more research on this and making sure it doesn't just turn into another story that was forgotten and left at the wayside.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to check out all the premium content we have on the site, such as the premium videos we do, this one on the cultural fall of wisdom itself. If you'd like to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.